Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Try and make that 10:30. I think we might be actually slightly over. Thank you. So just before we start, I'm just going to go through some general housekeeping with you. We're not expecting a fire alarm test this morning. Actually, we've had one already. But if the fire alarm does go on and is continuous, then please do follow members of staff to the emergency exits. Can I also ask that mobile phones are switched to silent as well for the duration of the subcommittee? In accordance with the hearing regulations, there's no standing chair for the hearing. So may I ask members to propose a chair for this subcommittee?
I'll propose Councillor Douglas.
I second it.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you. So I am Councillor Douglas and I'm chair then of this committee today, just been elected. Those present with me are Councillor Ziggy Atherton on the far left here, myself, obviously Councillor Douglas, and on the right we've got Councillor Elaine Holmes. The following council officers are also present: Natasha Taylor here, the trainee solicitor and legal advisor; Joanne Belcher, the senior environmental health officer; Simon Greensmith, the licensing and compliance officer; Adam Green, the senior democratic services and scrutiny officer; Carol Tedds, the senior services officer, no, the democratic services officer. At the end of the representations today, the meeting will be adjourned. The subcommittee ourselves will retire to make our decision. The parties must remain in the meeting room here and await the outcome, but must turn off their microphones as the meeting will remain live on YouTube during this meeting, during this time of the adjournment. Please turn mobile phones to silent and note that the meeting will be recorded and live streamed on YouTube. Okay, so agenda item number 2. Do we have any apologies for absence? No apologies received. Agenda item number 3. Do members have any interests to declare? No. Are there any other reasons to be declared that would prejudice our ability to hold a fair hearing and make a determination on this matter? No. Okay, that's fine. Moving forwards, agenda item number 4 regarding the new premises license application regarding the forbidden festival on land within the grounds and owned by Beaver Castle, known as Nipton Pastures and Frog Hollow, Beaver Castle Grounds, Beaver, NG 32 1PE. The procedure that we shall follow today is: 1, the licensing officer will present their report. 2, the applicant or their representative will present the application and address the representations with an opportunity afterwards for questions. The interested parties who are present will then be given the opportunity to present their case and their representation. There will be an opportunity for questions afterwards. The parties will then be given the opportunity to make the closing statements as number 4. Number 5, I will then adjourn the hearing to enable the subcommittee to retire and make a decision. We will be accompanied by our legal advisor who will advise on the law and any relevant guidance or case law. Any person may be represented by a person of their choosing, whether they are legally qualified or not. Any person may withdraw their representation at any point during the meeting of the hearing. The subcommittee and legal advisor may ask questions at any point in the hearing to clarify any matter. This is not a court, and as such, strict court rules do not apply. The hearing will follow the procedure I have just outlined. Any evidence to be given will not be given under oath, but I should remind parties that providing untrue statements is a criminal offence under the Licensing Act 2003. Any comment or statement or question must be addressed through me as the chair and notified by raising the hand. There will be no direct cross-examination by any person of any person. Questions must be permitted at the allotted times. I have and will exercise the right to intervene and interrupt any person that if that person is providing evidence or asking questions that are not relevant to the hearing today or to the 4 licensing objectives, which are: number 1, the prevention of crime and disorder; number 2, public safety; number 3, the prevention of public nuisance; and number 4, the protection of children from harm. If any person behaves in an unruly or disruptive manner, I shall exercise my rights as chair to adjourn the hearing and considering removing that person. Before we can start, can I confirm the parties have received all the paperwork? Okay, yes, we've got nods, that's good. Okay, we too, yes. And finally, the regulations state that all parties must have an equal length of time to make their representations. So we need to agree a maximum time. So is anyone's representation going to take more than 10 minutes? No. No, we can always cross that bridge if we have an issue along the way. We need to agree it now. 10 minutes then. Everybody happy? Yes. 5 minutes. Yes, we might do it in 5, somebody thinks, but we'll put 10 as the maximum. Yes. Okay. So each party will therefore have a maximum of 10 minutes in which to make their representation. The legal advisor will give a 1-minute warning before the end of the 10 minutes if the need arises. Okay, so we'll start. So over to the licensing officer report. So I am now inviting the licensing officer to present their report. Over to Simon Greensmith. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Chair. During 2021, Forbidden Festival Limited applied for and were granted a 1-year premises license to hold a time-limited license which allowed for 1 4-day music festival, including camping, in 2022, and that was for up to 14,999 persons in the grounds of Beaver Castle, Beaver NG32 1PE. Following the 2022 event, Forbidden Festival Limited have applied for a permanent 4-day music festival license, including camping, for up to 14,999 persons, and is to take place on no more than 4 consecutive days each year. The next event is provisionally planned for the 2nd to the 5th of June 2023, but this will be confirmed by the applicant with at least 6 months' notice. The application was advertised by way of a public notice in the Grantham Times, blue notices around the site, and on the Melton Borough Council website. The premises location is proposed to have the main arena and stages in Frog Hollow and the camping in Nipton Pastures, and you can see that on the additional overall site plan. In summary, the premises license application is for plays, exhibition of films, performance of live music, performance of dance, all indoor and outdoor, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 12 till 11 p.m. The playing of recorded music indoor and outdoor, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 12 till 0300 hours, and late night refreshment indoor and outdoor, Friday, Saturday and Sunday from 2300 to 0500. It is intended for all licensable activities to cease within the festival site area at 11 p.m, while licensable activities in the campsite area will proceed until 3 a.m. in the form of a silent discos. Late night refreshments will be required to continue until 5 a.m. on the campsite area. The supply of alcohol for consumption on the premises for Friday, Saturday and Sunday was from 12 till 0300, and the opening hours are from 10 a.m. on Friday until 12 midday on Monday. Forbidden Festival will take place over the course of one long weekend a year, opening at 10 a.m. on the Friday for camping patrons to arrive, and with the intention of having all patrons off the premises by no later than 12 noon on the Monday. During the 28-day consultation period, representations were received. One was from Environmental Health, who are the responsible authority and who must be consulted on every new application. The responsible authorities are the police, fire service, trading standards, development control / planning, environmental health, and the Home Office alcohol licensing team. Responsible authorities are not required to make comments on applications. They have an option to make a representation if they wish to. The environmental health representations related to the prevention of public nuisance and the licensing objectives, and involve minor variations to the noise management plan. Since the representation was placed, the applicant has replied to the communication from Mr. Marchenko, confirming they are satisfied with his suggested amendments, and his representation has now been withdrawn, and that's at Appendix D. The conditions from the license issued last year for this festival have been merged with the agreed EH representation, and they can be seen at Appendix AII. We acknowledge that this title, Conditions Agreed at the Licensing Subcommittee on the 2nd of March 2022, could be misinterpreted, as these have now been updated. The other representations came from 3 members of the public, which relate in some part to the 4 licensing objectives. The licensing objectives are the prevention of crime and disorder, public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, and the protection of children from harm. A list of all the representations and the outline of objections have been published within the report and agenda pack. But since the original public, so the application has attracted representation from members of the public described as other persons in the legislation. The first, of Mr. J. McCloskey, was on behalf of Denton Parish Council, which you can see at Appendix CI. This representation relates to public safety, the prevention of public nuisance, namely an increase in HGV traffic, and the relentless bass beat of the music and the amount of drugs confiscated and paraphernalia found littering Denton's streets. The second representation from Mr. R. and Mrs. A. Pape, Appendix CII. This representation relates to public safety and the prevention of public nuisance, namely excessive traffic through the small villages and the prevention of low pulsating noise in the village of Denton. And the third representation from Mr. and Mrs. Sharp, which is Appendix CII. This representation relates to the prevention of public nuisance, namely excessive noise in the village of Woolsthorpe. I would ask that members consider carefully all the information which is available to them in both the original agenda pack before making an informed decision on this application. And that concludes my report, Madam Chair.
Thank you, Simon Greensmith. Okay, so does anyone have any questions on the report from Simon? Oh, yes, Councillor Atherton, thank you.
Hi, how many complaints were received during 2022?
Off the top of my head, I think there was 3 in total. They were of a minor nature, and were basically saying that people had it was mainly concerning the noise in the area. One was from a cyclist who had his ride ruined while riding through the Vale. So there were all of that sort of nature.
Thank you, Simon and Councillor Atherton. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. You did mention in what you said, Simon, about drugs. You said drugs and the police. Could you elaborate a bit on that, please? And plus the fact that I don't know how to put this really, because a lot of the houses, etc., are owned by the Beaver estate, are they not? So anybody that is actually pretty upset about this own their own houses, do they? Perhaps, I don't know whether you know that or whether it's relevant. Thank you.
If I could comment really on the drug side of things, that was a representation that was brought up by Mr. McCloskey, which was on behalf of Denton. I think they found a lot of paraphernalia in the village when they did the litter pick. In relation to the drugs, I believe there were certain seizures on site, which is not uncommon with a festival of this ilk. But I'm not aware of anything that is untoward in that, and we've not received any representation from the police in regards to this matter. Again, there are some houses that are owned by Beaver Estate. There are some that are private, and I'm not aware of any correlation to that. And that wouldn't be something I would look at anyway.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. We have a gentleman at the back who wishes to ask a question. Yes, do come forwards. You will have to press the button in the middle, and if you could announce your name and organisation, thank you, and it will be addressed to Simon Greensmith, of course. Thank you.
Thank you. My name's Robin Pape and I'm a resident of Denton, and I'm one of the people who put in representation. Is that better? Can you hear me now? Sorry. My name's Robin Pape and I'm a resident of Denton, and I'm one of the people who put in a representation. It was really a comment on the number of complaints made. I've seen from the paperwork that there were channels through which residents could make complaints for the 2022 event, but the residents of Denton and Lincolnshire were not aware of those. So I, for example, did certainly contact the organisers with complaints, but I did not know where else to make complaints to. So I think the 3 may have been something of an understatement had people had the channels advertised to them.
I can only really go on the amount that we had in, and yes, it may be that complaints were made to other parts, but from complaints received by the local authority, I can only say what we had there, which was the 3.
Okay, thank you, Simon, and thank you, Mr. Pape. Councillor Holmes.
Thank you. Sorry to go on about this, but Simon, did you contact other authorities? Like Denton isn't in Melton, Woolthorpe isn't in Melton, but obviously in Lincolnshire. So did you go round the perimeters to actually explain about this, and so that the representations, if there were any, would come in to Melton, although they're not in Melton Borough?
Yes, as part of the process of advertising, it would have been put in the Grantham Times. We wouldn't necessarily go to every organisation, but we did on this occasion because we learnt from last time that we'd had conversations with Denton Parish Council, that we actually put it out to all the ward councillors and included them in this application.
So, lady at the back, yes, if you would like to come forwards and press the button in the middle, and if you could announce your name and any organisation, thank you.
Oh, hello. My name's Sue Bellamy. I'm Denton Parish Council. I think there's a little bit of confusion because we are in Lincolnshire, and obviously, as the councillor says, we are not included with the Melton when you're sending notices out. And also, there was no mention of this because it's the Grantham Journal. So I am presuming you're saying Times. I think it was the Melton Times. It was advertised and not the Grantham Journal.
If you just bear with me 1 second, I'll see if I can clarify that.
Sorry, I just missed the question. Was it regarding the newspaper advertisement?
Yes, was it advertised in the Melton Times or the Grantham Journal?
I don't have that information in my file. Sorry, it refers to the Grantham Times in your report.
Yes.
I can confirm it was advertised in the Grantham Journal.
Okay, yes. Thank you, Simon. And thank you, Sue Bellamy from the Denton Parish Council. Well, I've got a question of Simon to, as in my capacity of councillor on the committee today. You've obviously presented a really good report and explained how some adaptation has been made by in response to the environmental health comments. But I'm just wondering if in your what your opinion is of proceedings so far. Is there anything outstanding in your mind that is an issue as an experienced officer writing this report? Just your own opinion, if at all, if you have one. Thank you.
We were aware that the last year's application that some parts were omitted in the fact that Denton Parish Council brought to our attention that there were they'd been missed off the list from previous, which we've tried to rectify. The events that took place last year appeared to be very well run. The organisers were very open and provided all the documentation to the Safety Advisory Group in plenty of time. We had many meetings with them prior to the event occurring and even after the event to try and learn from things that had gone off on the event. So in the whole, my opinion is that it was a very well run event, and although there will be people that were inconvenienced due to this event, as a licensing officer, I don't really have any comments to make other than we are trying to make sure that it is run with as least impact to the community as possible.
Yes, thank you, Simon. That's a good account. I've been making notes. Okay. Anybody, any further questions at this point of Simon? Okay, so so moving on to the applicant's submission. I will now invite the applicant or their representative to present their application. Thank you.
Thank you. Good morning, Chair. Good morning, committee. I'm here. My name's Felicity, representing Simon. You may remember us from March earlier this year. I know that you, Councillor Douglas and Councillor Holmes, were sitting on that committee when, when you granted Simon a time-limited premises licence for a one-off event, which, as Simon has already set out, took place in July this year. The background is exactly as he's set out. We're back before you now, though, with an application for a permanent premises licence. It's in almost identical terms. It is for one event each calendar year, lasting the same number of days as the event in 2022, the same type of licensable activities, the hours are the same, the capacity is the same, and the location is the same. But the reason we're here asking you to grant us a permanent licence is so we don't have to come back each year with respect to ask you to grant us another one. But that's not to say, of course, that if you were to grant it today, that's the end of matters. Far from it. If issues were to arise in any future event, Simon is well aware that he can be brought back before you by any interested party and have his licence reviewed and, worst case, revoked. So what we're asking you today to grant is the premises licence, which I think I see it as a hook from which the detail of the event really hangs. What we're seeking from you today is permission in principle to have these events yearly from next year and onwards. But the nitty-gritty issues about noise, issues about transport, issues about safety and security all come under various management plans, safety advisory group meetings and community liaison. And those items are moving documents. Discussions are already taking place in a preemptive fashion with the police in the hope that you grant this licence. There's been a debrief following the event this summer, and now further meetings to talk about how to run the event going forward, as I say, if you're minded to grant the licence. So it doesn't mean that this is the end of it. It's just a very important part of the process to allow the events to continue. As Simon has said, there have been some objections to the application. The one from David Marchenko has been agreed, but it's pleasing for Simon to note that no one else who objected to the original application at the beginning of the year has objected to this one. And we're inferring from that those people are happy with how the event was run. So while Simon considers this year's event to be a success, there are, of course, learnings to be made. And that's why, as I said, we applied for a one-off licence as a test event, but are back before you now for a permanent one. It's important to note, as Simon mentioned, that the police are happy. They didn't raise an objection at all. The environmental health team are happy. All of the other responsible authorities are happy, and the majority of those residents who live nearby are as well. Simon engaged in a significant amount of pre-application consultation. He spoke with the key personalities in Melton, and he also wrote to the parish councils in the vicinity. He wrote to Denton Parish Council and Mr. and Mrs. Pape in August this year to notify them that the licence application had been submitted, and if they had any queries to come and speak with him. I think those documents are in your papers. And following the receipt of the representations, there's been an attempt as well to talk further. And actually just this morning, we had a very useful chat just for 5 minutes ahead of the hearing. And I think, without speaking out of turn, I don't think there's a desire to see this application refused. I think there's a real desire that they, Denton Parish Council and Mr. Pape, and indeed the Sharps, who aren't here today, are included in any dialogue going forward. And Simon is absolutely happy to commit to that without question. So he will reiterate that if necessary. He obviously takes on board the key concerns that they raise in the representation. There are 2 points largely. One is traffic and the other one is noise from music base. In terms of traffic, the flow of traffic by both contractors and festival goers will be governed by the detail within the traffic management plan. That's a moving document. It's not been finalised yet. And as you'd expect, the highways team at Melton lead on that. But Simon is happy to include any other parties as required: Lincolnshire Constabulary, Lincolnshire County Council, Denton Parish Council, and so on. It's not possible, though, I don't think at this stage, to provide broad statements such as the road into Denton will be closed, for example. We can't say at this point that traffic will be banned from certain locations, but Simon is very alive to the concerns that have been raised, and all of that will be taken into account to make sure that the least amount of nuisance is caused to everyone who lives in the vicinity. But Simon can absolutely agree that all contractors who are under his control will be told in no uncertain terms that they must not use Denton as an access way to the site. The other key issue is music noise, and particularly bass. I think it's important to note that all music in the festival area ends at 11 p.m. And Simon, of course, has an acoustician who is heavily involved in ensuring that noise limits are adhered to. The stages, I'm told, are designed to create the least amount of nuisance, and a lot of thought will be given to their orientation. But again, there's a balance to be struck. It's not as simple as just turning it away from one location because it might end up pointing at another. So all of those things will be considered in the round and made sure that the least amount of nuisance is caused. But again, Simon's happy to include Denton Parish Council in those discussions whilst the 2023 event is planned, if you're minded to grant the licence, and so on into the future. Just touching briefly on the licence application and the other conditions that have been offered. It's our view that the operating schedule is robust. There are over 50 conditions, I think, offered, in fact, all designed to uphold the licensing objectives. Traffic management plans, event management plans, noise management plans, down to smaller but no less important points around staff training, age verification policies, drug policies, and so on. And the operating schedule, as it is now, has met with the approval of the responsible authority. So the police are happy with what we've offered, as are the environmental health team. But there is obviously that commitment to ongoing further discussion. So in summary, we'd ask you to grant the application as applied for, but with the slightly amended conditions as requested and agreed to by David Marchenko. We've satisfied the concerns of the residents who have engaged with us, and we'd ask you to grant the licence to allow, as I've said, one event per year going forward, with a commitment from Simon to engage with all those who are affected or might be affected as that planning progresses. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so over to the questions. Do members have any questions? Councillor Holmes. Thank you, Elaine.
Thank you. Yeah, I can get all this. There's one thing here. Late night refreshments. Can you tell me how late night is, please?
Late night, the sale of hot food and hot drink only becomes a licensable activity, doesn't it, between the hours of 11 p.m. and 5 a.m. And so we've applied for the full range, because before 11 p.m. it's not licensable, and after 5 a.m. it's not licensable. And Simon will correct me if I'm wrong, but that's to allow hot food to be supplied to festival goers in the evening when the music finishes. But Simon probably has more details in terms of what that looked like at the event this year.
Yeah, I mean, they were essentially serving teas and coffees and making sort of bacon sandwiches and pizzas available for people on the campsite if they wanted to eat or drink anything after the silent disco finished.
You don't mind me just, the next thing that I'd like to ask, we had last week a discussion with the Chief of Police, not about this, I might add, but young people in the area, etc. And how can we absolutely know that there's nobody going to be in there under 18? If you'd help, please.
Yeah, I mean, they have, there is a soft ticket check when they come into the event where they have to show ID to the security to actually enter the event, is the main way of doing it. And then all the bars also operate a check 25 policy. So anybody under 25 or anybody they feel is potentially underage, again, is checked for ID on the bars before they can buy drinks.
Thank you. Oh, yes, Councillor Atherton.
Thank you. Simon, how are you going to ensure that the autistic consultant is making sure that everybody finishes the noise disco and the silent disco time, or that it's operated in the right time scale?
Yeah, the noise consultants work in conjunction with environmental health during the event between midday and 11 o'clock, where they've got monitoring outside of the area to ensure that we have the correct levels. And then they actually have another team that works inside the event, which works with the sound engineers on each stage to make any adjustments to any various stages. Again, we've got stage managers on each stage that are also responsible for making sure that the event shuts down at the correct time.
Oh, we have Mr. Pape as a resident wishing to ask a question. Mr. Pape.
Thank you. This may start to sound like a bit of a broken record before the end of this morning, but we've heard reference to consulting the police, but we must remember that Denton is not under the jurisdiction of Leicestershire Constabulary, and neither are our roads controlled by Leicestershire Highways. For example, the TMP for the 2022 event placed signage on the roads in Denton, but actually there was no authority to do that because Lincolnshire Police and Highways had not been consulted. That's just an example of the need to continuously add Lincolnshire to Leicestershire.
Thank you, Mr. Pape. Simon Greensmith would like to speak. Simon.
Yes, if I could just answer that really on behalf of the applicants. Part of the safety advisory group was discussed on the last application, and we did involve Lincolnshire Highways and Lincolnshire Police within that, so they were fully aware of what was going on and what was occurring. Although, as I said, Denton Parish Council weren't particularly aware of it at that time.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Holmes.
I think this is a really fair point, and I think there must be more stress on Lincolnshire Police, because obviously we have Denton onto that main road. There have been quite a lot of accidents, I know, onto the 607 from the T junction at Denton, have they not? And I think probably it's very remiss of Melton Borough Council. I'm not saying you, Simon, but that we haven't gone farther with Lincolnshire Police, because I just think it is really, really important, and it is right on the edge. You know, like Woolsthorpe is in Lincolnshire as well, and I do definitely think that we ought to look into this probably more. I don't know what you think, Simon, but it's something that I think it is vitally important to this application and further applications.
Thank you, Councillor Holmes. Simon, would you like to come in?
Yeah, I just wanted to let the committee know that both Lincolnshire Police and Lincolnshire Highways were in attendance at the final SAG meeting before the event actually went ahead. So it's wrong to say that they haven't been involved. Both police and highways were involved.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, well, I have a few questions myself. Firstly, after the event, there would have been a debrief meeting with all interested parties. I'm just wondering what came up at that meeting that you could initially address or start thinking about. Thank you.
Yeah, I think obviously the first thing that we're looking at is the traffic management side as to what worked and didn't work. And there's going to be some sort of adjustments and some amendments made to the traffic management plan. But I think generally it was felt that overall it worked fairly well. But I think there's a couple of routes and some timings that we'd probably look to change. I think there was some we're having further consultation with the police. So I think that the way that the security team and the police working together there's been 2 or 3 meetings already about how we actually work together better as a unit, and that's going to be another area that we're going to be looking at. I think apart from that, the general consensus was the event went well, but it's a constant evolution at the moment, where we'll be looking at all areas. And again, once we get into SAG group meetings again, I'm sure that everybody will have little bits to add into our plan. But generally, it's the working alongside the police in a better partnership and working on the traffic management.
Thank you for that. Yes, my next question was going to be about the traffic. We all work with sat-navs these days, and it takes you anyway, sometimes the closest, nearest way, and avoiding villages would be useful, wouldn't it? Because if you're coming from the Grantham way, you're going through Denton, Woolsthorpe, and that's and then if you try and avoid those villages, you might go through another village. So it's difficult not to comment at this point. We should just be asking questions, but I was going to just, ask how you could in the future avoid going through those villages with the HGVs. Also aware that it is a rural area and we have a harvester, combine harvesters, large tractors, but it's the additional traffic. So could I ask you just to try and avoid the villages in the future, and if you could give that kind of reassurance, I suppose. Thank you.
I mean, I think, as I explained to each parish council in the area, that we are intending to be here for a number of years. So it's working with them on a constant basis to ensure that we cause the least amount of distress, be it through reducing the delivery times and making those shorter, or whether we can reroute. It's a very difficult situation, as you said, because we make compensation for one village which causes us problems in another area. So I think it's working very much with the highways team to see what they feel is the right routes and the correct routes. But equally, we will put out in our delivery packs to suppliers to please ensure that there's any weight limits on roads or weight limits going through villages, that they actually adhere to that. And we do put maps within the production packs that go out to suppliers, explaining exactly which routes vehicles should be taking and the times that they should be making deliveries.
Thank you. That's quite comprehensive. And I suppose with small villages, you've also got the sides of the roads and very sharp corners and parked cars in these very old medieval villages. I should think, I know some of those villages, and Denton in particular has some very sharp corners. I'd be surprised if lorries can get by at all, actually. So there are practical reasons for asking this. Of course, it's a problem with the health and safety of residents. But I would think some of those lorries just couldn't get through at all, really. But anyway, that's just a comment. Another question about the litter. We had concerns in Woolsthorpe, in particular, that there was a lot of litter at the end of the event. What did you have in place to address that at the time, and will it be addressed next time? Thank you.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's another one of those areas which is an evolutionary process, that what we've got a better idea of the way that people exit the event now, and then we will have larger litter teams which cover the local villages in future. I think we covered Nipton, Harleston, Woolsthorpe, but if there's other villages that we need to look at, we'll have a roving team that goes out. And part of our sort of site management team also go out to, we'll be going out this year to look at various villages and make sure that they're all litter picked properly.
Yes, thank you. Councillor Holmes.
I was on that first committee, wasn't I? And I did suggest that you ask the CLA how they managed it because of the game fair, which everybody enjoyed, and I don't think there was one complaint. But it's just occurred to me sitting here, why do you have to go through all these other villages? Because if you went down to the Long Lane and to Bottisford, which is the 52, surely everything, there wouldn't be a village you'd go through, apart from Beaver, the bit of Beaver. Everything could be directed to the 52. People could come from the 52, they can from the A1 to the 52 and go around that way. You wouldn't have to go through a village at all. Wouldn't even have to go through Bottisford. It's only just occurred to me this minute, but
I mean, that's certainly something we can look at, but all we have the ability to do is put signage out and encourage people to use a certain route. If people actually choose to use a different route, then we have no actual control over that. So I think the logic for it is to have a dedicated route if you're coming from the north and a dedicated route in if you're coming from the south, because if you're coming from the south, people are not going to skirt all the way around the top to come in through a route on the north. So I think what we've previously done with people like Red Mile is we put signage out that says, please follow event signage, do not follow sat nav. And we try and get people to use the designated routes that have been agreed with highways, because quite often, as you've rightly already said, that satellite navigation systems tend to quite often direct you the quickest route or a certain route, and that can potentially take you through villages we don't want you to go through. So there will be more signage out, possibly further out from the event. I think maybe we'll be going 3 or 4 miles out from the event to start event signage, trying to direct people, and that signage will state that do not follow your sat nav, please follow the event signage.
But I'm sorry, I'm just pushing this one because it's just occurred to me. It is north or south you would be coming in. You'd come from the A1 or the M1 and you still hit the 52. So actually you wouldn't have to go through one village. And with the CLA game fair, they actually put a one-way system in then, and it worked. So we're just trying to help people, basically.
I mean, sure, we'll work with highways, and if they've got a strong opinion or they feel there's a better solution, we'll obviously work to the better solution. We're trying to find obviously the solution with least impact for everybody. And equally, as I've said, all we have no ability to enforce. All we can do is encourage people and put signage out to direct them in a particular route that we want them to use. But I have no ability to enforce people to take that particular route. So the easier and the more ingress routes we can offer them, the more chances that they're going to use the routes that we suggest, as opposed to making their own way there.
Thank you. We do have members of the public wishing to speak. We have Sue Bellamy first from the Denton Parish Council, and Mr. Pape afterwards. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Councillor Holmes. That would be a very simple solution, is to use the A52 from the A1, north or south. You are not going through any village. We can't see what the problem with that is, apart from, I understand you can't sort of direct people and make them use a certain exit or entry. But just like to stress, Denton is a very small village, but the amount of people that came through our village was unprecedented. We are used to a lot of traffic, obviously, because we are one of the major routes through to the castle. We don't have a problem with that, but this was off the scale. It was the heavy HGVs bringing all the staging through. We do have a weight limit, but they totally ignored that. And also, as I say, the traffic and also people on a day pass leaving the event in the evening. there's the traffic coming back.
Could we have the question, because you will have an opportunity in a minute to
Oh,
make your
sorry.
own
Sorry,
representation,
I
so
just wanted
you
to
might
add
be
that for the
repeating.
A52.
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay,
Thank you.
thank you.
Would Mr. Pape like to ask a question at this point? Thank you.
Thank you. It's based on something Simon just said, which was actually a little concerning. Simon said that we really need a dedicated route from the north and one from the south. Given that every route in from the A607 goes through a small village, be it Denton, Crowson or one other, how can you possibly have a dedicated route from the south without going through a small village, as opposed to going in from the A52, which we've heard about? So the question is, how can you have a route in from the south unless you go through Denton or Crowson?
Again, it's so at this stage, all I can really say is that we will sit down with Highways, we will sit down with SEP, which are the traffic management company, and we will look at the best option that we feel we can come up with. It's a collaborative discussion between Highways and our traffic management company, and I agree to a degree, but the problem is, if you get people that know the local area, they'll tend to go the route they know, regardless of whatever the signage says. So we will do our level best to put as much signage out and direct people in using the routes that we want them to use, which are the routes that have been agreed with both the police and Highways, that seem to be the best routes in and out of the event.
Thank you. I have one more question, but it's not about traffic. The question is, the silent disco, did it start at 11 o'clock? Was there a clear stop of the obviously loud public music and the swap over to the silent disco straight on, bang on the time of 11 o'clock at night? Thank you.
The silent disco started about 10:30. So which meant that as people came back into the campsite, they had the opportunity then to collect their headphones and actually go back to the tent to make sure that when the stages came down, there was something actually already happening. We tend to do that there's a general 30-minute overlap to ensure that people don't sort of hang about, start making their own entertainment. We actually have already got the entertainment operating, ready for them to arrive back in the campsite. So, and it did finish bang on time.
Thank you. Thank you for that. Any further questions? Okay, so moving on, does the legal advisor have any questions? No. Okay. We do not have any responsible authority submissions at this point. Now moving on to interested parties submissions. I will now ask the interested parties to make their representations. First of all, we have Robin and Anne Pape and Susan Bellamy afterwards, and Sarah Turtle representing the Denton Parish Council. So Robin and Anne Pape. Thank you.
Thank you, Chair. Some of the things covered in my representation, obviously, we have already discussed, but I feel there are a few more things to be said. Again, just to be clear, because Denton wasn't and Lincolnshire weren't involved in playing for the 2022 event, I feel I hope that is the key source of why we had so many problems in Denton, and therefore, hearing the reassuring words, I hope that that will be addressed. Nonetheless, the negative side is that the organisers now have a ready cooked plan, if you will, which they used in 2022. And being all humans, I suspect the temptation will be to just carry that plan forward with, I think the words were minor changes. That would not resolve the problems of traffic and noise which Denton experienced. For example, The traffic management plan we've heard was based on 2 routes, one of which went through Denton. It's difficult to see how you have a route from the south separate from north without going through Denton, to be blunt. We've also heard that all that the organisers do is place signage, and that would of course be extremely welcome. However, because of sat-navs, and also because I suspect many of the people who attended in 2022, Simon would hope will come again in 2023, they will already have driven through Denton. So again, human nature being what it is, you would follow the same route, whatever the signage says. Also, of course, because of messaging, as soon as one person has driven through, the signs have said, we can get through, the signs don't stop us. They would, of course, be instant messaging their friends. And so I fear that the signages would have quite a limited beneficial effect. I appreciate that Simon has no authority to close the roads, but as I pointed out in the representation, Leicestershire and Lincolnshire authorities regularly close roads and closed that very road for 2 weeks earlier this year. The road was closed between Denton and Belvoir. I see no logical, physical reason why that cannot be done. I appreciate Simon can't agree to that, but that would be a solution to the problem, and I'm sure the residents of Denton, subject to consultation, would probably prefer that road to be closed for a couple of days rather than what we experienced last year. So I just wanted to make clear that that would be a very major change to the TMP, not a minor amendment. So I do believe the TMP needs a very fundamental rethink along the lines that we've heard today. And such a fundamental rethink that I would, if possible, like to see some sort of condition not to close the road. I appreciate that's not the purpose of this group and you don't have that authority, but some sort of condition which actually, because of our experience, does say worse, the effect of all event traffic must be excluded from Denton, or whatever the wordage is, and then it's up to the SAG to work out how to do it. Their job is implementation. Your job is actually setting the rules. So a condition along those lines would very much welcome, because then it would mean that the detail would have to be put around that sort of condition. Other aspects like, in fact, Simon mentioned in correspondence to us in terms of the contractors and HGVs that he'd be happy to put in place a fining system so that if went through, they'd be fined. That would be very welcome as well, because that's a positive encouragement for them not to drive through Denton, which would be very welcome. Moving on to noise, I mentioned in the submission that the advisors on sound had actually suggested that you should point stages and speakers away from habitations, and indeed they probably were from some habitations. Unfortunately, the result was that the big speakers and stages were pointing directly at Denton in the 2022 event. And I do have some experience in acoustics. I did 5 years of research into acoustics in a government department, so I have some knowledge. It's not just about how far away you are with acoustics. Certainly, if you point a speaker towards somebody, I'm sure you'll appreciate it's louder than if you point it away from them. But also the lie of the land. If you to the west of the site where the event was held, the land goes up quite steeply. It's wooded. That will absorb a lot of sound and direct it upwards. So actually, habitations around the west side are well protected from the noise. By contrast, Denton and indeed Woolsthorpe are to the east of the site. And there you have a very smooth, gently rising slope of land. No buildings, very few trees. The sound just carries straight through. There is nothing to stop it. So in addition to the advice of their own advisors that staging should be pointed away from habitation, there is also the issue of the lie of the land, where in fact Denton and Woolsthorpe, not surprisingly, got a lot of noise because of simply the physical contours of the land. So I would certainly ask that all staging and sound systems for any future event are pointed away from all villages, including Denton and Woolsthorpe. And again, I think that's so fundamental that I would like to see, if possible, again, a brief condition, because of the impact we had in the current year, a condition that actually sets that out. It's clearly up to Simon and his advisors to design the detail of how they do it, of course, but a statement that all stages and sound systems must be pointed away from all villages, if you wish to put it that way, or Denton in particular, if I'm being parochial. And finally, if I could just reiterate the point that at all stages, please do involve the authorities, whoever they may be within Lincolnshire as well as Leicestershire. I think that point's through already, but I just wanted to reiterate it because it is very important. And of course, I'm sure the councils will look forward to working with the organisers in the more detailed planning, which I know will now go on. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Pape. Okay, so do members have any questions of Mr. Pape? Does the legal advisor have any questions? No. Does the applicant have any questions? Okay. And anybody else, any questions? No? No, I think that was quite detailed and comprehensive. Thank you, Mr. Pape. And we now have Susan Bellamy of Denton Parish Council, if you would like to come forwards and make your representations. Thank you, Susan.
Could I just say I concur with Mr. Pape? Thank you.
Okay, does anybody have any questions of Susan as representative of Denton Parish Council? No. Okay. Very quickly. Nobody. Okay, so now we're moving on to the closing speeches. I will now invite the closing speeches from the interested parties and the applicant. So, interested parties. Yes. Do they have to make? They don't. Right. The interested parties have just spoken. You can, if you wish, make a closing speech, but are you happy with what you've just given? Okay. Okay. And the applicant, would you like to make a closing speech?
Just briefly, if I may, just for 1 or 2 minutes. Thank you. So we'd obviously ask you to grant the application today. The responsible authorities are happy. No one is asking you to refuse to grant this licence, but rather there's a seeking for greater consultation and dialogue as things move forward. The event in 2022 was widely regarded as a success, but obviously learnings can be made, and Simon's already set out some of the key takeaways from the debrief that's taken place, particularly around consultation, particularly around traffic, and particularly around noise. But you've heard from Simon Greensmith today that the authority considers Simon and his company to be a responsible operator who worked with the authorities in the lead up to the 2022 event, and that will only improve and be enhanced for next year's event if you're minded to grant it. We've taken on board all of the comments that Mr. Pape made regarding arrival and access and egress to the site, consideration given to the A52 as the main route in and out. What I would say on that point is that a condition which compels everyone to attend the site in that way would be unenforceable. And if you were to impose it, Simon would be in breach of it the minute that someone erroneously drove through Denton. But you've heard Simon's commitment to greater liaison, greater consultation in terms of the traffic management plan, and making it very clear to festival goers and contractors about the best routes in, and obviously a request that the road into Denton be closed, as Mr. Pape pointed out, isn't something that you can declare. It's not something that Simon can agree to, but he can absolutely agree to discussing all aspects with highways as things progress. Likewise with stage direction. There are conditions in the operating schedule that govern the employment of an acoustician, that they will be there at all times, that there's a noise management plan that needs to go to environmental health many weeks before the event. So all of that nitty gritty about where the stages will be positioned, the noise levels, how they're monitored and so on, will all feature under that moving document. So I think in summary, I just ask you to grant the application as applied for, with those small additions that have been agreed with David Marchenko. Thank you.
Yes, thank you. Any members, have you any questions of the applicant? No, that's okay. Yes, sorry, these are the closing speeches. So where are we? Yes, I will now adjourn the hearing then, and all the subcommittee will now retire along with the legal advisor, and we do ask you to turn off your microphones, because this is in case this is still streaming out there, and we will be back as soon as practically possible. Thank you for your contributions so far, and we shall go and deliberate. Thank you. And thank you for your patience, ladies and gentlemen. The subcommittee have reached a decision, and I will hand you over to our legal advisor, Natasha Taylor, to present a summary of that decision. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, in reaching its decision, the subcommittee has had regard to the evidence put before it today, the council statement of licensing policy and guidance issued under section 182 of the Licensing Act. And when considering the evidence and representations, only those issues relating to the 4 licensing objectives have been taken into account. The subcommittee would like to acknowledge the consultation and engagement of the applicant with the interested parties and the reassurance given that this engagement will continue. The decision of the licensing subcommittee is to grant the license subject to the conditions as described in the operating schedule and those set out in Appendix AII of the report, subject to the amendment of condition 11 to require that the traffic management plan be submitted to the safety advisory group at least 60 days prior to the event and be finalised in conjunction with the safety advisory group, taking into account the representations put forward by Denton Parish Council and any other comments put forward from members of the public at least 14 days before any proposed event. A condition that the traffic management plan should include the provision for early warning signage of the recommended route where possible. A condition that the applicant engages with the safety advisory group, the SAG, to include representation from both Lincolnshire and Leicestershire Highways Authority and Police 6 months before the date of the festival, and continues to engage in the lead up to the event in order to ensure that any concerns raised can be addressed at an early stage and reflected in the event safety management, transport management and any other plan required to be submitted. A condition that the applicant continues to engage with neighbouring parish councils, including those outside of Melton Borough, in the run-up to the date of the event, in order to ensure that any concerns raised can be addressed at an early stage and reflected in the event safety management, transport management and any other plan required to be submitted. A condition that every effort is made to direct the speaker orientations away from nearby villages and that this should be recorded in the noise management plan. The decision will be formally notified to all parties within 5 working days. I remind all parties of the right to appeal and that any such appeal must be lodged with the Magistrates Court within 21 days of notification of this decision.
Thank you for attending, ladies and gentlemen. This is the end of the hearing.